Right, so today I want to talk about something a little different, that being the People's Party of Canada, the only party I believe that is viable in the upcoming Canadian elections, and I think one of the only parties in that you can even argue that's been good for Canada, and as long as I can remember. The first thing I would point out is that Maxime Bernier, who is the leader of the People's Party of Canada, ran for the Conservative party leadership 2 years ago, roughly, and he just narrowly lost. I think he got about 49% of the vote. So keep in mind, these are policies that um, the Conservatives almost ended up basically adopting. And if you're not aware of Canadian politics, or even if you are, the Liberals are the current party in power, but they've lost a lot of support, and the other viable party on the left, being the NDP, also isn't doing very well. So it's basically a default conservative win coming up in the next election, and at the very least, it'll be a minority. At the most, obviously, a majority. My guess it'll probably be roughly in between. I could see either one, but the Conservatives, since the People's Party of Canada was created, and in the last 2 or 3 years, the Conservatives have gone quite a bit to the left. I would say the Conservatives they're probably even somewhat comparable to the Democrats in the U.S. of maybe 10 or more years ago. There's maybe a small difference in there between social policy, but other than that, there's only very small differences. Like the Conservative Party of Canada is fully on board with the LGBT policies, climate change. They're not really talking about reducing the debt in any way. They're not talking about reducing immigration in any way or shape or form. So the Conservatives in Canada, although technically are quote unquote conservative, but in reality they're the most leftist conservatives you'll probably find, aside from like some of your European places where everyone's far left, or they're at the very least left. So getting into the PPC, they're the party that I'm more than likely going to vote for, and I suggest a lot of people vote for them. Um, the main reason why is that the PPC, I believe, is exactly what a I don't think they're as far as my personal beliefs would go. I don't think they take a lot of things quite far enough, but they take a very, very good step forward. And I think that for a lot of the I'm never going to vote for a lesser of two evils kind of people, I think the PPC is a very viable solution. I think they're also a viable solution to the people that don't vote, for the main reason that if the Conservatives were actually principled and conservative, that they would vote for them. So I'm not going to go too deep into their policies, but I will briefly touch on a lot of the things. They're into ending a lot of the dairy and basically the dairy cartel in Canada, and that it's very um, centralized and bureaucratic way of doing things, and the PPC wants to get rid of some of that bureaucraticness. I'm not even sure if that's a word, but you know what I mean. In that, if you reduce some of these needless regulations and whatnot, obviously that would reduce the price of stuff. So I don't think that's a huge issue in society today, but it would be, I think, actually I do think it's a growing issue. I don't think it's a major issue, and that the price of food has gone up a lot lately. And I mean, if you're not buying food, you haven't noticed, but if you are, you definitely have noticed. Um, the next one's a big one. In Canada, we have equalization, which means the poorer provinces pay the richer provinces and vice versa. The problem is a lot of it is very bureaucratic as well, in that Alberta um, has almost always lost out on the equalization, given that we were one of the richer provinces. Now Alberta is really struggling, and Alberta is not really getting much help, if any, and which is obviously very unfair. It'd be the equivalent to you having a friend who you always help with yard work and projects and stuff, and then you do that for years on end, and then one day you're like, yeah, can you come help me? And he's like, well, no, I can't do that. Like, that would be basically the equivalent of what's going on with that. So I think that's a fairly big issue too. Gun rights. The People's Party is very big on gun rights. Um, I don't. They're not necessarily like a constitutional carry like in the U.S. They don't really want to take it that far. But their big thing is that most gun laws nowadays and the gun laws that are proposed, all they really do is strengthen gun control on law-abiding citizens. They do nothing to target actual criminals who couldn't care less about, having an extra piece of paperwork or license or having to take an extra course to get a gun. Like they don't care about that. They're probably not even aware of it. So that's another very good policy that I think something's an important issue is to have gun rights. Um, Healthcare is a very big issue nowadays, and they want to give provinces incentives to deal with wait times and rising costs. They don't really seem to be on board of flat out getting rid of government-funded or socialist healthcare, but I think creating any incentive we can to reduce costs and to make it any more free market in any way, shape, or form, I would be on board with, and I think that's a good idea. Um, Getting rid of interprovincial trade barriers, I think obviously the less regulation, especially needless regulation, which is, I'd say, probably the majority of regulations out there, is a good thing. So that's a default good policy. They're the only party in Canada that is rejecting the global warming alarmists nowadays, and I think that's a very, very good reason for me to want to vote for them, and that the Conservatives are well on board this idea that climate change is this huge issue that needs to be dealt with, and that I think there's a lot of people that definitively prove that it isn't an issue, and even if it is an issue, the government is the worst group of people you could possibly want to solve it, because the government, they can't solve the problem of poverty. I mean, it is better than the past, but I think a lot of that would be because the free market has created technologies to help reduce poverty, not the government has created policies. The government can't deal with homelessness. The government can't really solve any problem in society. Um, Foreign policy focusing on the security and prosperity of Canadians. This is a huge issue, that another one that the Conservatives are looking the other way on, in that in the West we are doing a lot of stuff to help other people in other countries, and I don't think that it's a bad thing, but the problem is that we have a lot of people in our own countries that need a lot of help that aren't getting it, and the Liberals, especially in Canada, tend to be I know Justin Trudeau just gave just Central American and I think maybe some South American countries $220 million to help deal with climate change. Like, of all the things, like we have a lot of homeless. Crime is a increasing problem in Canada, both in rural and in city areas. So why can't we spend that money on that stuff? The national debt is a big issue. Why not just not spend that money and not go $223 more million into debt? There's so many more better things that money could be spent on, and that's something that, if you follow Maxime Bernier on Twitter, he points that out every time Justin Trudeau blows money on something stupid, that we could be putting that money towards so many better things, and that's um, yeah, like we could be putting the money towards things that are so much better. And this is probably the other big reason, is that freedom of expression, although technically is covered in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the courts have basically not held up people's right in that. Technically, we have free speech, but number one, the courts have contradicted that in many cases, and number two, we don't have free speech like the First Amendment in the U.S. would be, in that free speech is guaranteed no matter what, unless you're inciting violence or slandering people. That's the only time when you can't have, when free speech is where there's exceptions. And that's, you can't incite violence, and that's not saying that, and that's, it's direct incitement to violence too. It's not like, I think that, Group X is a bunch of, idiots or something like that. If you say, I think Group X is a group of idiots, and, go attack them, then that's obviously a violation of the First Amendment, and you could be prosecuted for that. Slander would be, saying that, the owner of X business is cheating on his taxes when when he actually isn't. And it would be more popular for like a, some left-wing news outlet to say, this guy's cheating on his taxes, when in reality he isn't, or this guy is, anything along those lines. I think most people probably know what slander is. But like I said, that is the People's Party of Canada. Obviously, you can go to their website and look more into it, but I think that they're exactly what Canada and I think a lot of other countries need. They're a sensible. I think a lot of people would think of them as far right, and that they're really not far right. They're more of a center right party, for the main reason that a far right party wouldn't. Number one, they wouldn't be big on free speech. Number two, they wouldn't have a foreign policy that is, let's not intervene in other countries' affairs. Those are two basic things that a far right party would both disagree on. So that's about it as far as this video goes. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the PPC. They are a party that they're not going to win the election. They're probably not even going to get second, but could they get third or fourth? I think that's realistic. And if we could get a conservative minority with the PPC getting maybe just a few seats, I think that would be great. Like I said, I think a lot of people, the reason that a lot of people don't want to vote PPC is that they don't want the Liberals to get back in. But my position on that is the Conservatives aren't really conservative. They're honestly, I think they're a center left. Like, they're not even center right. Like, that's how far to the left they are, and that's how far to the left the Liberals are. Like the NDP, people usually think of as the far left party, but the Liberals are almost as far left, and like the NDP are borderline communists if they're to the left of the Liberals. Like, the Liberals are, I can't think of one policy the Liberals have, and I would challenge someone to point out a policy they have that a centrist or a true conservative or a true centrist would hold. I would challenge people to find me one policy that they hold, and I don't think you could. And like I said, I think the PPC is the only legitimate, common sense party out there. But I don't want to talk too much about this. I've already talked quite a bit, so I'll probably make more videos about this in the future. So if you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.